Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, colleagues and friends, depending on where you're joining us from home. My name is Joan Mutinda on behalf of AFCEN. I warmly welcome you to today's webinar on early childhood development and climate change. We know that climate change is not just an environmental issue, it directly affects the well-being, learning, and development of our youngest children. AFCEN, together with partners, has been working to bridge this gap through research, dialogue, and advocacy. Today, we will hear insights from country studies in Burundi, Ethiopia, Ghana, the Gambia, Malawi, and Zambia, and also benefit from the experiences shared by our colleagues from the Asia Pacific Regional Network of Early Childhood, ARNEC. This will enrich our learning and show how different regions are approaching the intersection of ECD and climate change. We would also like to acknowledge the support of Bainam Family Foundation, which enabled in-depth studies in the Gambia, Ethiopia, and Zambia, early opportunities whose funding supported surveys in Malawi, Burundi, and Ghana, and ECDAN for strengthening our collaboration with ARNEC. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your contributions and to a rich, engaging discussion. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. Interpretation is available. Please click on the globe icon and select your preferred language, English, French, or Portuguese. Kindly remain muted unless speaking to avoid background noise. We'd love to know where you're joining us from. Kindly use the chat box to introduce yourself by sharing your name, country, and organization. And please use the Q&A box to share your questions throughout the session. Presenters, panelists will respond to them as they come in. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording as well, the resources will be shared afterwards in the AFCEN website. With that, let us begin. It is now my pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, Josephine Feller, Advisor Save the Children, convener of the AU CESA ECED cluster on access to quality services, and the coordinator of the ECD and climate change community of practice. She will share opening remarks and introduce the community of practice, what it is, how you can benefit from it, and how to join. Welcome, Josie.
Thank you, Joan. This is really a pleasure joining you all. I hope you can all hear me well. So on behalf of the AU CESA ECD cluster on access to quality services core team, I would also like to take this opportunity to recognize presence of my colleagues, starting with our chair, Mr. Tenguela Ba from Senegal. If you are there, please, if you can switch on your video and wave the colleagues. We also have a co-chair, Mr. Lucien Hien from Burkina Faso. We also have a conveners, Ms. Damaris Wambua from Kenya, and Bethlehem Taye from Ethiopia, as well as myself, Josephine Frela, co-convener from Tanzania, but also the coordinator for Community of Practice on Climate Change. So I would really like to welcome you all into this important webinar of a kind, focusing on early childhood development and climate change, recognizing the timely needs of us to really be able to discuss this important aspect for us, recognizing the challenges observed in our region, including temperature increases, flooding, and drought, which has resulted into various emergencies, and even where some contexts we have polycrisis, which as a result has resulted into some ongoing impact on children's development and well-being. This is especially unimaginable when referring to the young ECD age group. So it is really about time we start this important conversation at a different levels and capacities. Recognize that the webinar today really brings professionals, researchers together And the objective of today is to share findings and lessons for ECD networks to advocate for early childhood development policies and services within the climate agenda in their countries and regions. Identify and leverage the entry point for advocacy at national and subnational levels, but also facilitate cross-regional, cross-country knowledge exchange on policy development and advocacy strategy. As John mentioned, that we also have a climate change and ECD community of practice. So to continue creating the platform for us to be able to learn from each other within the region, understanding what are the best practices are there, and also provide opportunities for members to share regional trends and updates, achievement or gaps or challenges, as well as build consensus about key actions that needs to be taken jointly to address the impact of climate change in early childhood development, especially in the region. My apologies. I'm realizing my video was not on. So the community of practice for ECD and climate change is part of the subcommittee under the Access to Quality ECD program and services. As I mentioned it earlier, so it's under the kind of a bigger other technical working groups cutting across. And the platforms provide opportunities for development of blog series. Some of you might have seen some of the blogs which have been published through AFCAN, and they are in AFCAN website for your interest, sharing experiences from different countries. But also we have webinar for experience sharing, including this one today, as well as we are looking at providing capacity building opportunities on climate change and ECD where possible. So we are really encouraging as many as possible members to join the community of practice so that we are able to learn from each other, to advocate for the children in the region, and be able to learn from each other in terms of exchange. There is a QR code which will be shared in the chat, as well as link for anyone who is really interested to join the community of practice. There is a form for you to complete and share. So I would ask Joanne if you can share that link in the chat, where if you can, please. But in the meantime, I really like to welcome you all, and really looking forward to hear all the studies and experiences coming from different countries. Thank you, and back to you, Joanne.
Thank you so much, Josie. We now move to our next speaker, Dr. Neilima Chopra, Program and Partnership Specialist at the Asia Pacific Regional Network of Early Childhood, ARNEC, who will share lessons from the Asia Pacific region. Welcome, Neilima.
Thank you so much, and hello to everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me and providing this opportunity to share our experiences and learnings, from Asia Pacific. So just give me a minute. I'll start my presentation and then. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so oops, so sorry. Just a minute. I don't know why I'm facing this issue. Yeah, I don't know. Apologies for this delay. I don't know. I was earlier sharing and it was working fine. Now there's some issue. I hope it works now. Yeah. Okay, so thank you for this opportunity, and just like to share a few experiences and learning from Asia Pacific. Now we understand that climate change is real, and everyone, is experiencing climate change throughout the world, and we know that children especially are more vulnerable and to these extreme weather conditions. And as we know from the reports from UNICEF and from other organizations that uh, climate change now is a child rights issue, where almost 1 billion children throughout the world are experiencing extremely high risk and extreme weather conditions, which are impacting their overall development. Now, if we look at this figure, if you can see it on the screen, we understand that children who are born now, they experience even more extreme weather conditions than the previous generations. So if you see the figure, children born in 2020, they experience the wildfires, for example, twice as many wildfires as compared to a person who was born in 1960s. Similarly, crop failures, droughts, they are almost 3 times the exposure to these extreme and adverse climate events is almost 3 times. Asia Pacific has recently, experienced a lot of flooding, and we see that again, many countries in the region are experiencing extreme floods, flash floods, which cause extreme devastation in the region. And so are the heat waves. And all these extreme weather conditions, they have an impact on young children. When we look at the nurturing care components, the 5 nurturing care components, we see that climate change and extreme weather events is impacting all the components, whether it is nutrition, because there is crop failure, there is food insecurity due to heat waves, due to drought conditions, children, and also because the nutritional value of the crops is going down, because of the heat waves and the various climatic issues that we are experiencing. Similarly, health also is affected because uh, there are more vector-borne diseases. There is air pollution, which is impacting the lungs and the other body parts of children. Safety and security, definitely we see there's a lot of displacement happening. There's a lot of migration, and in many Asian countries, we've seen that after a after an extreme climate condition like drought or flooding, the number or the incidence of child marriages goes up. The number of children trafficked also goes up. So again, this causes a major issue to the safety and security of children. Parents are also going through a lot of stress because of these extreme weather conditions, and this also results in the responsive caregiving component being affected. And we all know that because of these floods, heat waves, air pollution, we see that the schools and the early childhood learning centers, they are often closed, and this results in disrupted routines and learning for young children. So overall, we see that the climate change is impacting all the components of nurturing care, which are essential for children. I would also like to draw your attention to the regional risks. We understand that, certain countries are more affected by climate change. Now, if you see the figure on the screen, it shows, what we call something called Children's Climate Risk Index, CCRI, which ranks countries on the basis of how vulnerable children are to various climate events or climate crisis. Now we see that countries in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, these countries, if you can see, they are more dark in color. they are ranked higher in the risk. And so this means that children in these countries are exposed more to climate events, and also these countries have limited coping capacities. So this uh, ex exaggerates the risk also for children in these countries and in the region. Now, Arnik, with this context, Arnik has been working on this thematic of early childhood development and climate change since 2019. We've done scoping studies, we've done micro researches. Some of these I will be sharing. We've also developed toolkits, fact sheets, and advocacy videos, and I'll be sharing that video also, a little teaser of that video, and also done many trainings in the region. We're also supporting, with the help of our partners, many country-led advocacy campaigns and initiatives like EcoRise in Indonesia. There are a lot of trainings and seminars in Bangladesh. We are also having consultations with Ministry of Education in Bhutan and youth workshops in Nepal. And then we also have something which is an advocacy campaign which is led by youth in the region. And to showcase a little teaser, because there is not enough time, I will play a video which shows the kind of advocacy our youth is doing in the region.
Whenever we talk about climate change, we often forget the most vulnerable group, young children. What they captured reflects urgency and resilience.
Oops. Yeah. So this video is the full video. I'll drop the link to this full video. You can watch this video, and it's amazing work of how young people see the impacts of climate change in their countries. Now, all this initiatives that we've been undertaking has resulted in meaningful impact on ground. We see that there is a lot of awareness in various stakeholders. There are a lot of consultations with the stakeholders, including government in the region. There's a lot of capacity building initiatives. And also at the regional and global level, we are presenting the perspectives from the global south, where it is important, for example, in COP or various climate events. And all this is feeding into the meetings that we are having at the regional and global events. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about the micro studies that we have undertaken in these different countries. Now, these are small scale studies with small sample size, but they help us in understanding the local context, the local issues that are there in the different countries that we have undertaken the study, and they also help us in planning the country initiatives, what needs to be done in the countries. And just to give an overview of from the different micro studies, we found that the climate awareness amongst parents and teachers, early childhood teachers, varies across the region, and there is a demand to undertake capacity building and capacity strengthening for parents as well as teachers. There is a request and demand for understanding how to integrate climate change education into the early years curriculum. We also saw there is, that certain children from certain communities, marginalized communities, they are more impacted, and the parents are also expressing that if there are alternate solutions provided, it will help them in in taking better care of the children. And definitely, we've seen the disaster preparedness is a big thing where we need to integrate the issues and address the needs of children in the disaster preparedness, because we see that these disaster events or extreme climate events are happening more and more in the region. So I will also like to share one more interesting study that we did in Pakistan. Pakistan experienced massive floods in 2022, and we did this, we tried to understand what happened, how did the communities address or take care of the needs of children in their communities. And we found that there were many gaps and challenges faced by the people on ground. Now, immediately after the floods happened, there was a whole support by various humanitarian agencies. But there was these humanitarian agencies, they don't have they have limited capacity to handle or to understand the needs of young children. So there was this need to look at the how to train the humanitarian agencies to look at the young children and address their needs when there is a climate crisis happening. Also, we found that there was a lot of lack of play space or child-friendly spaces or child-safe spaces. Abuse of women and children was also reported. Uh, Policy level also there were a lot of gaps, because the national education policy, it had a good roadmap for ECE in broader education, but how to integrate ECE or how to implement ECE activities during emergencies, that was not part of this policy framework document. Similarly, the DRR policy had minimal integration for ECE. So, there was this gap that was very evident in terms of policy. Also, we found that, when there's a climate crisis or a climate event happens like flooding, how do we look after the women and children? So the healthcare aspect also, there were no labor wards for pregnant women. There were many incidences where women had to give birth in that area only. So there were no special provisions for them. A lot of nutritional deficiency was found, and what was interesting is that many parents were giving, because there was lack of food, they were giving something called gutka. It's a form of tobacco to curb hunger in children because the food was not available, and there was over reliance on breastfeeding, which was not a good healthy alternate for children. And definitely we saw that, there was a lot of intergenerational poverty. These people who were affected by floods, it was like, it was so difficult for them to come out of, because they left behind their livelihoods, they left behind their farmlands, and they moved and were displaced. And it was causing something called intergenerational poverty. So these are the challenges that we found through this case study. And overall, from the micro studies and from this case study of flooding in Pakistan, a few lessons that I wanted to share on in terms of climate change and early childhood development. So it's very important to prioritize children in the climate policies and to put children in the national adaptation plans, in the nationally determined contributions. So these are very important aspects. We need to really integrate children's needs in these climate policies. Also, we understand that certain communities are more affected, and certain regions, certain countries are more impacted. So, how are we using the climate financing to help these communities or these countries? That really needs to be done. Definitely, strengthening early childhood systems for making them more climate resilient is very important. And protecting children and building the health, nutrition, education systems, the nurturing care components, we need to have an integrated and multi-sectoral approach here. And taking the communities along and various stakeholders, involving them in this process is the most important thing that we felt. There were a lot of ideas and innovative approaches, for example, from our youth also, that we kind of found from their learnings. So this is what I wanted to share from Asia Pacific region. Thank you. You can reach me here, and I'll stop sharing and welcome any questions if you have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelima, for that wonderful presentation and the valuable lessons shared, especially on bridging inequalities through climate finance, strengthening early childhood systems for resilience, and fostering multi-sectoral action. So these are really powerful insights that really will help us in advocating for key issues on ECD and climate change. We will do the Q&A at the end, so let us now move to Africa. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Rongetzai Fambasai, ECD and Climate Change Technical Advisor, to share insights from the continent. Welcome, Dr. Ronge.
Yes, thank you so much, and a greeting everyone. If you could support me, Joan, with setting up the presentation. I'm excited to join everyone today, and thank you, Nelima, for giving us the perspective from the Asia Pacific region, taking into account the regional dynamics, the regional vulnerabilities, and speaking to the African continent. I think I want to build up on what Nelima has just shared. And from the angle of Africa, we see, beginning in 2024, that the subject of climate change and early childhood development, that's when it started to pick up pace. And that's when we also started to do a bit of work, and more work is coming on trying to understand what is the landscape, what is the status of ECD and climate change on the continent, and also understanding the regional dynamics. And by this, I mean sub-regional dynamics. It could be in West Africa, it could be in East Africa, it could be in the North Africa, in the Sahel region, but at the same time in Southern Africa, because these contexts also speak to how children are significantly impacted. So with the landscape study, the focus was more on climate commitments on the continent, the action and accountability to see who is accountable for what. If we could move to the next slide. Who is accountable for what on the continent? And I think this is more premised on the understanding that the African Union, as the governance structure that's sitting on the continent, is doing tremendous work. But we also want to understand what role is being played, what are the gaps, what are the challenges. So my presentation is just going to set the scene in terms of speaking to the study we have done, connecting the dots on why we are doing it, and then looking into the benchmarking, the laws and policies, and then linking up everything to then the action that we need to do going forward. So in terms of connecting the dots, it's important then to understand that climate change impacts children in so many ways. That is directly impacting on their environment, impacting on their relationship with their primary caregivers. It could be their fathers, it could be their mothers, it could be their grandparents. But also it has psychological impact and impacting on education and various facets of children. And I think the best way to put it across is to use the nurturing care framework and see that on all the 5 dimensions on pillars, climate change has significant impact on young children. So you look at the fragility of children, you look at their vulnerability, you look at aspects to do with adaptability and the risk, and you compare that with their age being below the age of 8, being below the age of 5, and so forth. And then you see that there are significant factors that then impact significantly on their development, on their success, and their well-being. If we could move to the next slide. So what we then looked at, from the African perspective is to then say, why is this landscape important? It's important for various reasons. Number one, in 2024, that's when the African Union was celebrating, we were celebrating in Africa, the year of education. And some of the key questions were, how are we linking climate change to education, and specifically in early years? And at the same time, that's when the African Union's Committee on the Rights and Welfare of the Child was also developing a general comment on Article 11 on the right to education. And also the question was, how are we integrating issues to do with early childhood and climate change within the global work in the region that was being done? And simultaneously, around the same time, that's when the UN Human Rights Council adopted a resolution for the development of the fourth optional protocol to the UNCRC, the UN Convention on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, speaking to free primary education. So the need also to then put a spotlight on ECD and it's important. And when you bring that conversation to the child and climate change, you then see significantly that there are so many factors that are surrounding the child that are emanating from climate change. So you have issues to do with hunger and poverty that is linked and caused by climate change and how that impacts on children. You have natural disasters that are happening in different regions. We have seen cyclones in Madagascar, cyclones in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, and how that have impacted significantly on the well-being of families and young children themselves. We have seen how sometimes in some regions conflict has emanated as a result of the need to have water and some other factors linked to climate change in various parts of the continent. We see that violence against women, gender-based violence, it's all linked to climate change and various factors. Health risk and government debt. Speaking to government debt, we know that many African governments are in debt as we speak, which then affects in terms of climate financing, climate planning, and linking that to how then governments are going to be responding to the impacts of climate change, providing for healthy and early learning and nutrition and security and safety of young children. So you see that the child who is at the center is impacted. There are so many. So some of the questions that you see is to say, this is not only the list that you have. There are so many factors that are caused by climate change and significantly impacting on young children. If we could move to the next slide. So what we then did is then to look at the benchmarking in terms of what are the laws and policies that we have and frameworks on the African continent. You then see that we do have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights that speaks to the right to environment. We have the protocol on the Banjul Charter, which is the one that's speaking to women. It speaks significantly on the right to protect women and young mothers and so forth. And the African Children's Charter, speaking from a rights-based perspective on the right to education, it doesn't speak of ECD, but we know that ECD is one of the key components when it comes to early learning and education. The AU Convention on the Protocol and Assisting Internally Displaced Persons and how it's speaking to climate change explicitly, and then the African Union Climate Change Resilient Development Strategy and Action Plan, in as much as it does not provide specifically for ECD, but we note that it provides the entire framework in which the continent is operating. And then we move to say, what are the key instruments that are very critical when it comes to issues relating to education? Then you have the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child and the Agenda 2040 that are speaking primarily on the need to provide for education. And then you have the AU Continental Education Strategy, the 2016 to 2025, which was silent on climate change, but then the 2026 to 2035 is so explicit. I think it mentions 11 times climate change and how that links then to the development of children. The general comment on the right to education that was passed by the African Children's Committee is also speaking to the impacts of climate change. So we see that on the continent, in terms of education, the linkages are coming broadly at the continental level. And there are ECD programs that you see, like the school feeding programs, tree planting programs that are happening in different countries, but it's not well coordinated. And then we say, since we have observed this, how about issues to do with nutrition and access? How about issues to do with disaster management? And then we look at those policies to benchmark. We then move to the national level and say, at the country level, what is happening? And then we got to appreciate that we have so many countries that have climate change acts or climate change instruments. And these climate change acts, when you do a survey, no instrument from these countries, Kenya, Mauritius, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Benin, Gabon, speak specifically to early childhood or early years in general. They are mute on that. And that's a significant concern that we also noted in the landscape study. And then we noticed that, climate policies and action plans are wide, and we have a barrage of them on the continent. And when you look at different countries, when you look into a climate strategy or when you look into a climate policy, there's no mention of ECD, there's no mention of childcare, there's no mention of early years and early childhood, which raises a concern. And then we looked at some of the countries that have, different constitutional provisions that looks at the right to an environment as a constitutional right. And then in some instance, it then speaks to future generations, which of course, by interpretation, it implies that it's linking up to younger children in the countries and in the continent. So we then make those connections and then say there is a concern that without the explicit linkages to ECD, truly ECD, early years and childcare will definitely fall through the cracks in climate programming across the continent and also in different countries. If we could move to the next slide.
Dr. Ronge, sorry, just a quick one. Kindly slow down your talking to give interpreters time to interpret.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. If we could move to the next slide. So what we then observe in the study is that there are key gaps and challenges. And these key gaps and challenges are on the continent itself. But also you find these challenges in different countries and in different regions. For example, there is one challenge of fragmentation. And here we speak to the fragmentation of institutional arrangements that are not in harmony. And what we noticed from the institutional arrangements is that we looked and say, at the African Union level, which are the key instruments that are responsible and that are mandated to look at climate change and children's rights? And then we noticed that much of those institutional arrangements, they don't speak to each other in terms of integrating the work that is being done. For example, we noticed that in relation to climate change at the African Union level, we have the African Committee Heads of State and Government on Climate Change. We have the African Ministerial Conference on the Environment. We have the African Group of Negotiators on Climate Change. There is the African Union Commission Department responsible for agriculture, rural development, blue economy, and sustainable development, which also has aspects and work to do with climate change. There's the African Committee of Experts on the Right and Welfare of the Child, which is an organ of the African Union that is a working group working on children's rights and climate change. You have the African Island State Climate Commission. On the other hand, you have the Congo Basin Commission. On the other side, you do have the Climate Commission for the Sahel region. And recently, there's a secretariat of the Africa Climate Summit. When you look at all these institutional frameworks that you have on the continent, and you start to look at the mandate to understand where ECD is falling, it's difficult to connect and see who actually is mandated to push ECD and climate change on the continent on these institutional arrangements. Then that tells you that there is disharmony in terms of ECD work that is being done in climate change. So there is that huge gap. Then there is regional climate laws and education laws that are fragmented. So you have education laws that at some point are silent on climate change and some climate change laws that are silent on ECD. So they are not speaking to each other. And at the same time, when you go to national levels, you find that you do have, disaster management policies or strategies. You do have national climate laws and policies. You do have education laws and policies. And these are sitting in different departments. So disaster is sitting in the department to do with disaster risk management. And when it comes to education, it's sitting in the Ministry or Department of Education. When it comes to climate, maybe it's sitting in a department in the Ministry of Environment. And these are sector-based and they don't coordinate in terms of then how do they meet in terms of pushing for climate change in early years and then that integration and harmony in terms of pushing the agenda at the country level and at the national level. Then we also notice that there is exclusion, and when we say exclusion, is the exclusion of pre-primary in climate literacy. This is also visible on the continent. For example, the African Union climate strategy in itself, it's silent on pre-primary climate literacy, in as much as it's explicit in terms of providing for climate literacy in secondary schools and in tertiary schools, but it is silent in terms of bringing that conversation of climate literacy at the lower level in pre-primary. And then there is also a challenge in terms of infrastructure, that there is no investment into climate resilient ECD and pre-primary infrastructure. In cases where you see, cyclones that are devastating education infrastructure, you see that there are significant gaps in terms of then retrofitting itself, but also, reinvesting in terms of replacing the infrastructure for kids, for school learners to go back to school. Then the other challenge is data deficiencies. And here we notice that there is not enough data in climate and nurturing care dimensions. You can have studies that are done at the local level, but that's not one that you see at the continental level, giving you a helicopter view of what the region is encountering in terms of where is the data speaking to these critical issues of ECD and climate change. If we could move to the next slide. So we then make a call to action. And I think here the call to action, and then speaking also to issues relating to recommendation. And the call to action here is then to say, in terms of the challenge that we have seen, the harmonization of laws, policies, and strategies, it's important that in these sector-based areas where there are thematic issues to do with environment, with nutrition, with social protection, with agriculture, land use, there is the need to have harmonization of laws that can then speak to a multi-sectoral approach in terms of ensuring that ECD is focused in intervention on climate interventions, and then implemented to scale and with speed to ensure that no child is left behind. We speak also to the greening of the education agenda and curriculum across the different countries and the region, and then data generation and knowledge management systems, and also leveraging existing mechanisms and systems that we do have in different countries. And by this we say that in countries like Uganda, the climate change set up different mechanisms that then could be leveraged in terms of pushing the agenda. In Zimbabwe, the climate change and management bill is setting up institutional arrangements that can be leveraged to then push the agenda forward. If we could move to the next slide. And in closing, I think I just want to then highlight and put a spot to amazing countries that we then worked with in terms of really getting to understand the impact at country level and at subnational level. And these 6 countries, I think they've been mentioned. What we notice is that in these countries, the methodologies that were adopted are diverse, and at the country level to try and understand, climate change awareness at community level with, caregivers, with traditional leaders, with community leaders. But at the same time to understand that what is it that is informing the lack of knowledge or the lack of awareness or the lack thereof, or the understanding that is there. And some of the key issues are to do with then how traditional practices and cultural factors are then impacting on awareness raising happening at community level. For example, we noticed that in Malawi, one of the key issues that came out is that because of the belief that cyclones are caused by angry gods in specific communities, so when they come, they're the ones that are impacting harshly in bringing that kind of bad luck on the community and devastating impact. So what that entails from those findings is that the communities are passing that same information about climate change and linking to traditional and cultural factors, which then impacts on how children get to understand. But also the surveys looked at the health impact, cognitive impact, psychological well-being, and then looking into the socio-economic factors, as well as the community policy response in terms of these impacts of climate change. And in closing, I also want to highlight that we had national dialogues in the Gambia, in Zambia, and in Ethiopia. And these national dialogues were engaging media practitioners, policymakers, government, civil society, researchers, academia, and the youth to bring the conversation on ECD and climate change and elevating it at the national level. And I think my colleagues then are going to amplify more. But what we have seen is, for example, in the case of Burundi, the study was conducted in 8 provinces, reaching a survey of about 2,000 people. So those are some of the significant, work that has been done by countries. But I will allow the colleagues to also then share the key findings in the countries that are going to share in the case of Ethiopia, the Gambia, Ghana, and Malawi. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ronge, for such an insightful presentation. You highlighted the importance of a multi-sectoral approach, something we also observed in the Asia-Pacific region, alongside the need for clear coordination at multiple levels and the urgency of scaling up ECD-focused interventions with speed to ensure no child is left behind. We now move swiftly to hear country case studies that were done in Malawi and the Gambia. First, I would like to welcome Joylet Genda, the National Coordinator of the ECD Coalition of Malawi, to present Malawi's case study. Welcome, Joylet.
Thank you very much, moderator. Joanna.
Yes, we are sharing your slides.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. So continuing with the conversation that has already started by the previous speakers, I'll share the highlights of a study that was conducted in Malawi on the same. So the Malawi study was about the impact of climate change on young children in Malawi. And the picture that you saw on the cover page actually is one of the community-based childcare centers in the country, which was blown off the roof during the data collection. So it really brought the reality to the study that we were conducting on that time, around last year, December. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'll just share an overview of the study and the key findings and the recommendations which were made by the participants in the study. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So in terms of the objectives, the study mainly aimed to identify the level of awareness of climate change and its manifestations in Malawi, to say what causes climate change in Malawi. Then to determine the impact of climate change on young children, to document community and policy response to climate change impacts in Malawi, and then make recommendations on gaps for strengthening the response to climate change impact on young children in Malawi. So we appreciated that there is already a lot that was happening by some actors, including the government, but then we wanted to appreciate to what extent were community members and the stakeholders aware of issues of climate change and its impact on the young children, and come up with the suggestions on recommendations to improve the situation in the country. Next slide, please. So a highlight of the findings based on the objectives that we had is as presented, whereby on the awareness, it was noted that all the respondents that participated in the study, which was of course qualitative, but also we added with the key informant interviews. So all the participants actually demonstrated a high level of understanding in terms of what causes climate change in Malawi and how is it manifested. So most all noted that there were issues which Malawi was experiencing or is experiencing over the years, including rising temperature. So the temperatures are higher than area, and then leading to heat waves. It can get even hot in some parts of the year. and then increasing the frequency of floods. This was actually more recent to the experience during the data collection, because as a country, we had a number of devastating floods in the form of cyclones, actually. So people were aware of these issues, saying it's because of climate change. And it included stormy wind and dust. So we have a range of manifestations of climate change in Malawi. And in terms of the impact on young children brought about by climate change, the participants also were very aware of a number of impacts, which I will explain on the next column in the middle. And as Dr. Ongezai highlighted, of course, there were patches of misunderstanding or lack of knowledge on what really causes climate change. For instance, some could even highlight misconceptions which they have to say, whatever we are facing nowadays, like the cyclones, the floods, whatever which are happening, they are basically because of punishment from God, because of our actions as Malawians. So that demonstrated at least a gap to a certain extent in terms of knowledge on the causes of climate change. So narrowing down to the impact of climate change on young children in Malawi. So the middle column highlights a summary of the findings. So in short, we categorized our assessment based on the different categories of impacts of climate change on young children. So on physical development of the children, the participants actually were very aware and highlighted effects like the health issues, including diseases brought about by water if it's not hygienic, infectious diseases, and malnutrition. They were able to link up to say, if we have a drought and then the households do not have adequate food, children are affected nutritionally, affecting their physiological development. And in terms of psychosocial or emotional development, the participants were very sharing on these experiences that the country has, including anxiety, depression, stress, trauma. For instance, they would cite cases whereby in 2023, we had a cyclone which was very devastating. It led to loss of lives. People died, and people would cite this is traumatic. And then when the children saw these in videos, in the WhatsApp, on Facebook, it's traumatic even to the children. And in terms of cognitive development, so the participants were able to link how climate change affects the children's participation in the school. For instance, when a school infrastructure is damaged, like an ECD center shown on the cover slide, it affects the children's participation in education, leading to loss of learning and then long-term academic performance effects on the children. So they were able to highlight all this linkage, which theoretically we also discuss. So going to the socio-economic impacts of climate change on young children, the respondents were actually even able to link as well to say, for instance, if we have a flood, we have a drought, and then a household produces less, since Malawi is basically agro-based economy with most of the households depending on farming. So if there is a climate-related event like a drought, like the floods, households do not harvest enough, and then the food shortage hits the household. If you depend on agriculture for income, it means the income is also lowered, and all that affecting the children, the household's capability to support the children. So leading to poverty in the long run. And then if the children are affected in terms of development, they were able to say if the children are not going to school, in the long run, they lose the prospects of being highly educated, and then they are losing even on career prospects later. So it was an interesting study. And then next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to wrap up now in terms of their perspective of the situation and what the country needs to do in order to reduce the impact of climate change on young children. So there were a number of ideas which the participants brought forward to the assessment team to say there is need to continue raising awareness to the public and even stakeholders, as indicated that there are patches of awareness challenges based on the myths that were found. So awareness on the causes and of course on the impact were highlighted so that we can improve on addressing the causes of climate change and then addressing the impacts that it has on children's development. There was an issue of strengthening enforcement of existing environmental management related policies and laws. So it was noted that some laws and guidelines are available in the country which promote management of the environment so that we can address some of the issues regarding climate change and its impact on young children and their households. So, but the implementation was noted to be somehow weak in some cases. So the respondents really suggested that we strengthen action on that. But also it was noted that climate change was missing in some policies which relate to children. So it was noted that it was recommended that we really needed to integrate climate change in national development and child development policies so that we can be addressing the issues which affect children related to climate change, and then scaling up climate resilient programs across the different sectors that relate to children and even others that are not directly relating to children to still address that, and promoting action on environmental management by different actors, including the communities. And one key observation was in terms of financing interventions related to addressing climate change and environmental management. So the respondents suggested that we champion mobilization of adequate financial resources to tackle the impacts of climate change. So in summary, this is what the study unearthed from the interaction with the study participants. I submit. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. In Malawi, we say Zikomo. Over to you, Joanne.
Zikomo Joylet for that excellent presentation. Colleagues, please continue to post your questions in the chat box. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end. And also the presenters and panelists are answering some of them in lifetime. I now welcome Abdullahi Jadama, the National Coordinator of the National ECD Network, the Gambia, to share the case study from the Gambia. Jadama, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julius, and thank you, the previous presenters. Thank you all to the audience for this opportunity. And could you share our flash, please? Okay, as Joanne mentioned, I'm Abdullah Jadama, the National Coordinator for Early Child Development Network, the Gambia. And I'm here today to present to you climate vulnerabilities in the Gambia and the nexus between climate change and education, climate change and ECD. Next slide. Good. In this, my presentation today, that's the outline of my presentation, which is going to be on the objective of the study that we have conducted, the key findings that the study has revealed, and then also the recommendations so far that we've been able to make from the study. Next slide. Good. So in this research, basically we were looking at these three objectives. One, to generate and increase evidence on the impact of climate change on ECD in the Gambia. And number two, we were also looking at enhancing the understanding of stakeholders at regional and national level on the nexus between climate change and ECD. Then the third one is strengthening partnership with key stakeholders, that is policymakers, private sector, civil society organizations, community of practice, and families to advance the ECD agenda in the national climate change policy and action. These are our three objectives. And then next slide. We then look forward to looking at the key findings that we'll be able to generate from this research. And based on that, there are urgent call for concerted effort on intensifying climate change policies and strategies and communities.
Jadama, are you with us? Jadama, maybe you can unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Jadama? Let's just give him 1 minute. Let's just give him 1 minute. He's rejoining.
Yeah, sorry, the network. Yes, I was saying thus calling for more advocacy efforts to create awareness on the nexus between climate change and ECD, as well as to incorporate ECD specific and sensitive strategies in climate change mitigation and adaptation policies and strategies in the country is of a real concern. It is also important to note that all stakeholders and actors, including frontline practitioners, believes that it is high time to have climate change integrated into school curricula, including ECD, the most vulnerable children, to the impact of climate change. And then lastly, there we said that the ECD community of practice called for more investment into the ECD subsector for a sustainable future and lifelong learning in schools. Next slide, please. Next slides. Good. In our recommendations, we've pinpoint specific recommendations to specific ministries in the Gambia. This one is for the Minister of Basic and Secondary Education to strengthen the school infrastructure, including early warning or early learning centers to withstand extreme weather conditions, educators and policymakers to customize climate change education, climate change adaptation, the provision of safe and nurturing school environment for young children, and for the Minister of Health to consider policies and programs that could ensure the health system has inbuilt
I think he has dropped again, Jadama. I see you.
Sorry about that. Yes,
No
I'm
problem.
here.
Proceed.
Yeah,
Proceed.
so I was saying that the Ministry of Health to consider policies and programs that could ensure the health system has an inbuilt mechanism to adapt and respond to climate change related health disasters or hazards, such as outbreaks of malaria, cholera, and then the meningitis and so on, as well as respiratory infectious diseases. With regards to Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Natural Resources, we suggest and recommend that they build capacities among communities and families on disaster risk reduction, influencing empowerment of parents with young children. And also at the Ministry of Agriculture, we also encourage and suggest that community-based early warning systems be targeted households with information on enhancing their adaptive capacities or adaptive capabilities and coping strategies towards climate impact and ensuring that household food securities are guaranteed. And lastly, but not the least, the civil society organizations, we also suggest that ECD networks and CSOs to build and establish a network of a group of networks or community of practice on ECD and climate change to act as a platform or a medium for generating and disseminating evidence on the effect of climate change on young children, and also advance policies and advocacies for inclusion of early childhood development into the national climate change dialogues and actions. And then next slide, please. So far, so good. That has bring me to the end of my presentation, and I'm sorry for that breakup as a result of erratic net of internet. That's so far our studies in the Gambia. Thank you so very much. And back to you, Joan.
Thank you so much, Jadama, for the insightful presentation. Again, let us put our questions in the chat box and we will address them during the Q&A session, which we are almost there. And all presentations will be shared on the AFCAN website. I now hand it back to Dr. Rongedzai, who will guide us through the final session. Welcome back, Dr. Ronge.
Yes, thank you so much, to you, Johan, and also to Abdullahi and to Joylet for the excellent presentations. As we move on to our panel discussions, we have our colleagues here from the ECD network of Ghana, Ebenezer, and our colleagues also from Ethiopia. So I will allow you colleagues, I'll ask you questions. Let's make this interactive. I'll ask you questions and then you can respond to those questions. And my understanding is, based on the studies and the findings that we got from Ghana, what are the key challenges that, are standing in to hinder, climate change awareness at the national level and at the same time at the community level in Ghana? Over to you, Ibe.
Thank you very much. Okay, please, am I audible enough? Thank you. So our responses are based on a survey that we conducted last year, October 2024 to December 2024, in 2 regions of Ghana, in Greater Accra region and then also the northern region. It's a mixed method cross-sectional study which focused on climate risk and then early childhood developments in Ghana. We had responses from 253. We did a quantitative survey, and then we did some desk review as well. We focused on rural Amasaman, Dovenia, Peri-urban, East Legon area, and the Medina, northern region. So I'm just giving you a background of where we conducted our survey and where we had our information. And evidence from our reports suggests that many caregivers are not deeply conversant with climate change issues. Only 25% reported being very familiar, and about 54% somewhat familiar, and 22% not familiar at all. It limits message uptake and appropriate child-focused responses. So those are the things that we gathered. And also, we also noticed that there were gaps between program gaps weakening community visibility of the issue. A majority of key informants said no climate child programs exist in their communities. And we had key informant interviews, like the opinion leaders, the health officials, the teachers, the child educators. So we had two groups of respondents. We had the key informant interview, and then we had the families, and then the community members. So the key informants said that they were not aware of any climate child programs within their communities, and 45% reported some initiatives, and 5% were unsure. And then also uncertainty, no resources available was also frequently reported when asked about child relevant support. That's health, education, water, signaling weak signposting and public information flows. At national level, the desk review that we did showed that that implementation of Ghana's climate change policy is hampered by limited resources, inadequate infrastructure, and lack of public awareness. School-based awareness is also limited. The desk review also cites evidence that climate change education in Ghana schools is insufficient, reducing systematic child and caregiver-oriented messaging. And then with religious, cultural, traditional dimensions, the study asked the key informant interview whether traditional practices are affected and how that impacts children. But the findings didn't detail any such thing, but there are perceptions that people think issues of climate, issues of the weather are acts of God and not merely human influence. So that's the general perception, but not from the survey itself, but these are the general perceptions that there is in the country. And then practical stance the reports that it proposes town hall engagements with chiefs, with religious leaders to drive awareness. So these are the things that the awareness issues that we gathered. And then also there was an issue of economic and then political interest.
Yeah.
Economic and political interest. People are looking at their welfare, their pockets, cutting down trees as firewood to sell. And then also when there's a political government in power, which interest, should I stop it? Should I give some other incentives? So those are the things. And then we highlighted some also, there are some systems to move on, but I think I'll say that in my next opportunity. So thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. These are systematic challenges, and they are systemic. They are embedded in the communities, in the fabric of the society itself, lack of investment that's coming from government, etc. Thank you for highlighting that. And over to Nemiat, in case of Ethiopia, my question is that, from the Ethiopian experience, and I know that the study was unique in itself because it was looking at the government initiatives and strategies. So my question is, what are the main exclusionary challenges for ECD and climate change that you noted from government initiatives such as the Green Legacy Initiative?
Thank you, Rongi. I hope you can hear me clear.
Yes, Logan.
So thank you for the question. From the Ethiopian experience, we have several exclusionary challenges that have become clear after an assessment or research done on bridging climate actions and early childhood development in Ethiopia. That was research done by the grant given by Afghan. We would like to thank you for them. So what we have obtained as a result was that, first of all, there is no child-specific focus or indicators in this program, whether we call it in the Green Legacy Initiative, and there is a siloed implementation. We've also observed that there are design blind spots, funding gaps, and also low visibility of children in climate narratives. So what I mean by no child-specific focus or indicators is like there is a large climate program, like a large climate program like the GLI or the CRG set very ambitious targets of planting billions of trees. That, of course, helps to reduce emission and to restore the soil, etc. However, none of these frameworks ask what about children? And for example, the GLI counts the seedlings planted, but not how many were placed in schoolyards, in childcare compounds or playgrounds, where children would directly benefit from the shade and nutrition. So this leaves the youngest children invisible in the program design, but I'm sure this will, be improved in the very near future. So we've also mentioned, I earlier mentioned that there is a siloed implementation where climate change is usually driven by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. Meanwhile, ministries who are most responsible for the ECD, like the Ministry of Women and Social Affairs, Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Education, are not at the decision-making table. As a result, when GLI is rolled out, its design doesn't ask how do tree planting campaigns reduce heat stress for children in schools, for example. And the lack of cross-sectoral collaboration means childbirth, nutrition, and learning are almost excluded. The design blind spot, I would say the GLI focus on scale over function. The metrics is like 5 billion trees planted rather than who benefits from those trees. So this leads to a design oversight. Trees may be planted along the highways or farmland, but not prioritized in the schoolyards, as mentioned earlier. Fruits and nut trees, which could also address malnutrition, are less prioritized compared to the fast-growing species. So the design gap means the program is a little opportunity to reduce, I'm sorry, to reduce heat in the ECCE centers or improve children's diet. There is also the funding gap that I have mentioned earlier, where Ethiopia mobilized large resources for climate, but budgets are not really tagged for the ECD outcomes. Even if programs indirectly benefit children, there is no earmarked finance for climate ECD integration, as it's also a almost new idea for the country. So the other one is the low visibility, as I mentioned, of children in climate narratives. So probably this is going to improve in the future, but government communications on GLI often emphasize more of national pride, economic growth, and environmental leadership. But rarely do official speeches, reports, and campaigns highlight how climate actions impact the children's health, safety, and learning. And this absence of these narratives, makes it very hard to generate a political will and public awareness for child-sensitive integrations. And as a result, children remain, silent stakeholders, most affected, but but least mentioned. So, in summary, I would say, the experience shows that children are excluded, not because programs like the GLI are unimportant, but because they lack child-specific focus, cross-sectoral collaboration, intentional design, dedicated financing, and visibility in narratives. Thank you, Rongi. Back to you.
Yes. No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. In the interest of our time, I want to, pose two more questions, one directed to each of you. I think it's one question, but I think it's linked to the responses that you have given and what we are finding in Ghana and also in Ethiopia. So I'll start with you, Eben, to say, what could governments do to mitigate these challenges in climate change interventions for ECD in Ghana, and understanding that government is the primary duty bearer and that's our key partner in the way that we do.
Okay, thank you very much. To begin with, I mentioned awareness issues. So, of course, the number one is education. So we should write ECD into our core climate instruments, add child-specific goals, targets, and budgets in the national development documents, and then updates sector plans on education, health, water, WASH programs, social protection. At the district planning guidelines, tie the district planning guidelines to show early childhood development co-benefits. Also, secondly, we should have a budget tagging and then climate financing. That is to create a budget tag for child responsive adaptation, earmark a portion of the district fund for resilient schools, clinics, WASH programs, and then prepare for adaptation and fund proposal with clear child outcomes. And also resilient infrastructure standards. That's adopt minimum standards for heat-safe classrooms, flood-safe school siting, and then water-secure clinics, retrofit highest risk sites first. So those are the things that we recommended for, that were captured also in the survey that we collected from the field. Then also service protocols and workforce training, integrate heat illness, vector control, mental health first, and then learning recovery into health education frontline protocols. Yeah, and then train the community health workers and teachers accordingly. And then a shock responsive safety net for caregivers of young children. So these are the few things we captured and for the as a response. And then, of course, the bottom line, government can end the exclusion of ECD from climate action by making children visible in policy language, line items, and indicators, and by financing a practical district-delivered package that keeps young children healthy, learning, protected, and nourished as the climate changes. Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you. Over to you, Nembia. I think it's the same question, but I want to bring it down from the national government and say, what could substructures of government like the seat of Addis Ababa do apart from the efforts of national government? What could city government and local authorities, do in terms of pushing the agenda, but giving the seat of Addis Ababa as an example?
Well, thank you, Rongi. We can mitigate this challenge in 3 ways. The first one is like in 3 main fronts. So the first one is policy and the governance, and we can also look at the finance and programs and the service and advocacy. So coming to the policy and governance, explicitly, we need to integrate ECD into climate frameworks like the CRGE, the GLI, and the NDCs. For example, Ethiopia climate resilience like the CRGE and green legacy initiatives could go beyond general targets of tree planting and include child-specific goals like all childcare centers to have at least like 35 to maybe 50% shaded play areas by 2030. You see, so things like this, interministerial coordination, like the Ministry of Women and Social Affairs is sidelined with when big climate projects are led by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. So governments could create a joint task force where all the all the interested ministry officers hold equal responsibility, ensuring that childcare, health, and education perspectives are not excluded. So another one is child sensitive indicators that could also make part of the policy and governance. So in this one, we can introduce monitoring tools such as percentage of childcare centers built with cooling and cooling or ventilation standards, percentage of ECCE centers located in flood safe zones, etc. So the financing and programs which I mentioned is like the first one is budget tagging for climate and ECD. So in this one, government can allocate a specific line in climate budget for child-focused actions. For example, if Ethiopia spends like millions in GLI tree planting, at least some portion of this amount could be marked for planting in schools, childcare centers, and playgrounds. It's already been done, but it's something like, of course, there is a good start, we cannot deny, but this could, help to further mitigate the problem. So the child can benefit also from the components of GLI. We can, instead of measuring like success in billions of tree planted, we can come like 20,000 preschools as now shaded by the GLI tree planting initiative, you understand, or fruit trees planted in schoolyards for improved malnutrition, something like this. The other one is service and advocacy. In this one, climate smart childcare or ECCE standards. Government can mandate that all new childcare or ECCE centers include like a shade structure and natural cooling system, like a flood resilient toilets and safe wash system, energy efficient lighting and water harvesting, etc. And also training the workforce, training the ECCE teachers and health extension workers, for example, who are on the spot on climate-related risks. For instance, teachers could have like guideline on heat days when outdoor plays should be limited and hydration should be enforced. And also the other aspect is the media advocacy, which we are on a good, there is a very good start, I would say, but still journalists, especially those who are trained in Ethiopia back last year in our media training on ECD that was done in collaboration with AFCAN and the African Center for Early Childhood Development here in Ethiopia. So these people who have been trained earlier can use their local language and cultural framing to raise awareness. For example, on the radio programs that could be linked with tree planting, with child safety. A shared school is a safe school to build public support. So these are the things I would say, suggest to, mitigate this challenge that we are currently facing. Thank you, Rongi.
Yes.
Back to you again.
Yes, thank you so much, Ebenezer and Gambiat, for this panel discussion. I think we would have wanted to engage more and get into depth of some of the critical issues that you have raised. But I think it shows systematic challenges that we see across the different countries and across different regions. And these challenges are also happening at the national and at community and sub-national level. In the interest of our time, I noticed that some of the key questions were being posed in the chat box and some were being responded. And thank you for the colleagues that were responding to some of those questions. But in the interest of our time, because our meeting was supposed to end right on the dot at past, I'll request my colleague Elizabeth, the program manager, to give us closing remarks. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Indeed, it's been a very, very engaging discussion. And I would really like to give my congratulations and thanks to all those who really participated in this. Of course, having just been opening and representing the the working group, the improved quality working group, and specifically the community of practice for ECD and climate change. And then the visiting guest, Nelima from ANEC, we really appreciated your input. And Rogedzai, thank you for bringing us into Africa and laying the landscape for us, and having the countries, Malawi, Joylet, the Gambia, Jadama, and Ghana, Eben, and Nebiat representing Ethiopia, and all of you bringing in just such a wealth of information and knowledge. And I agree with you, Ronge. We could have done this even if we went for 3 hours. There would still be things to talk about. So we hope we can keep these conversations going in our various communities and networks. The slides are already available on the Afghan website, so don't hesitate to get there and you know, have another listen and another look at them, and find ways, even through the Afghan communities. The QR code will be here right now, and even through the Afghan communities, we can get this conversation continuing. So there will be a barcode displayed on the screen, and we'll also see the link provided on the chat. Thank you also to Joanne. You moderated this for us very well, and the flow was very good. And so we invite you to continue this conversation, and let's also continue networking and seeing how we can support each other. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.